Hey everyone, welcome to Life Reflections. Today I'm sharing a life story that might just hit home for you. If you enjoy it, give it a thumbs up, drop a comment with your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button to join me for more moments that matter. Let's dive in.
My wife doesn't even have a job. That's what Eric said. Loudly. Proudly. In front of a room full of people we both knew, people who worked for the company I built. He was laughing, drink in hand, basking in the attention like a frat boy who never outgrew college. They all laughed with him. No one looked at me. No one asked how I felt. Because in their minds, I didn't matter. To them, I was the joke. But what none of them knew, not Eric, not his coworkers, not even the executive team, was that I was the CEO. The founder. The owner of the entire company. I wasn't just someone's wife. I was their boss. Their silent, invisible boss. And that laugh? That joke? It would be the last one Eric ever told at my expense. I had been planning this day for over a year. It began the moment I realized the man I married didn't respect me, not as a woman, not as a partner, not as a human being. What started as subtle digs, "Why don't you try applying for a receptionist role?" slowly morphed into open disdain. He called me directionless. Too soft for business. Lucky to have him. Every dinner, every office event, every networking party became a stage for his quiet cruelty. And the world clapped for him. They clapped because I let them. Because I let him. I played my role so well, the sweet, supportive wife with too many passion projects and not enough traction. I drove a modest car. Wore low-profile brands. Spoke sparingly in meetings. I made sure no one saw the real me, the strategist, the builder, the founder of a tech empire that now ran global logistics across 3 continents. I became invisible. And in that invisibility, I found power. Eric didn't know that I used shell companies to hire the same team that sat around our dining table every quarter, clinking their whiskey glasses and cracking jokes about gold diggers. He didn't know that the art on our walls, the house we lived in, the wine cellar he bragged about, it all came from my company's funding. He thought the company had rejected me. He didn't know I'd written the rejection email myself. The irony was poetic. I watched as he built his false empire on top of mine, taking credit for deals I orchestrated, making hires I'd approved behind the curtain. He rose through the ranks with swagger and charm, always talking about his vision for the future, always forgetting who had built the blueprint. He thought he owned the castle. He didn't even realize he was living in my guest house. I let him bask in his delusion. Until it wasn't enough anymore. I'd spent months gathering evidence. Private investigators. Email threads. Financial audits. HR reports buried under layers of bureaucracy. I knew which team member had a history of backdoor deals. I knew who laughed too loudly at the sexist jokes. I knew exactly how deep the rot went. Then, one day, I said, "I think I'll apply to Carter Dynamics." Eric laughed. "For what? Coffee intern?" I smiled. "Why not? You never know." I submitted my resume under a new name, Emily Walker. No LinkedIn presence. A generic Gmail. A low-tier design portfolio scraped from old college templates. Just enough mediocrity to get ignored. And sure enough, HR slotted me for a 9 a.m. courtesy interview. I showed up in a boxy thrift store blazer, no makeup, hair tied back like someone who'd just lost their 5th job in 6 months. Security barely glanced at me. The receptionist forgot my name. Perfect. I sat in the cold, over-air-conditioned lobby, pretending to nervously review my resume while watching Eric stroll through the front doors like he owned the building. He didn't see me. He never did. And I wanted it that way. The interview itself was a masterclass in subtle humiliation. The panel, 3 middle-aged men in slim-fit suits, took turns glancing at their phones, yawning, and asking cookie-cutter questions with thinly veiled judgment. Why Carter Dynamics? I really admire your innovation, I replied with a shaky voice. They smirked. One of them leaned over to another and whispered something behind his hand. They weren't testing my skills. They were performing. I played the role right back. The uncertain woman who just needed a chance. The kind they loved to mock. Through the glass wall, I saw Eric walk by. He did a double take. Laughed. Pulled out his phone. And within seconds, all 3 interviewers' phones buzzed at once. I didn't need to see the screen to know what he wrote. Guess who's trying to work here? The rest of the interview was a blur of condescension and polite dismissal. We'll be in touch, Thomas from HR said, already turning back to his emails. I stood up, thanked them, and walked calmly to the elevator. Then I changed. In the hidden suite on the 42nd floor, the one only the board knew about, I stripped out of my disguise and slipped into my real skin. Black wool dress. Gold cufflinks. Hair down. Eyes sharp. Natalie Carter. CEO. When I stepped onto the executive floor 15 minutes later, no one recognized me. Not at first. The woman they just laughed out of the building now stood with straight shoulders, commanding silence with her presence alone. I walked into the boardroom and said nothing at first. Just placed a single document on the table. Eric's face blanched. Natalie, he croaked. No, I said quietly. Ms. Carter. CEO of Carter Dynamics. Then I handed him the termination letter. Signed. Dated. Final. He tried to speak. I didn't let him. You mocked me in front of your team. You laughed at my name. You used my money, my company, my vision, and pretended it was yours. You thought you were clever. You thought you'd gotten away with it. He looked around the table for help. The others stayed frozen. I continued. Today, this company begins a new chapter. One built on transparency, respect, and zero tolerance for arrogance masquerading as leadership. I turned to security. Escort Mr. Wells and his colleagues off the premises. Their employment is officially terminated. For cause. The silence in the room was deafening. He stood, stunned, as the security team moved in. I didn't flinch. Didn't cry. Didn't gloat. I simply turned to the board and smiled. Now, shall we begin the real meeting? And that was just the beginning. Eric always said I was lucky to have him. He'd smile when he said it, tilting his head, eyes soft, voice dipped in faux affection, but the message was clear, I needed him. He was the ambitious one. The successful one. The man with a 6-figure salary and real goals. Me? I was just floating. Wasting time on passion projects and startup ideas that never went anywhere. You've got a great heart, he'd say, but the business world's cutthroat, babe. Maybe stick to creative stuff. He didn't know that when we met, I already owned 3 LLCs and had filed patents in 2 countries. He didn't know that my name was on the founding documents of the company he now worked for. He didn't know that every random opportunity that came his way, from the mentorship program to the VP job, had been orchestrated by me, behind the curtain. And that wasn't an accident. The truth is, I never planned to hide. I never wanted to be the invisible CEO. But after 3 failed relationships, each ending the same way, I decided to try something different. Each time I revealed my success too soon, it shifted something in their eyes. I saw it happen in real time. A flicker of entitlement. The subtle shift in power. Suddenly, they weren't dating me, they were dating a bank account. A shortcut. A step up. The woman who could open doors they never would have reached alone. And every time I pulled back, said no, set boundaries, they showed their true colors. So when I met Eric, I wore a mask. I told him I was consulting, freelancing, trying to get my foot in the door. I let him pay for dinners at cheap restaurants, pretended to be impressed when he talked about his college business classes, laughed at his jokes about startup bros and their inflated egos. And when he talked about Carter Dynamics, the mystery-shrouded tech firm that was changing everything, I smiled. He didn't know I was already in the middle of a third-round funding deal with a major defense contractor. He didn't know the phantom CEO everyone gossiped about was sitting across from him, sipping red wine and letting him feel like the smartest guy in the room. It was an experiment. How long could I live in the shadows? Could I love someone who only knew the edited version of me? The answer came slowly, painfully, over the years. At first, he was sweet, supportive, proud, even. He'd tell his friends, Natalie's chasing her dreams. She's not like other girls, she's got fire. But as his career started to grow, something in him shifted. He got louder, sharper, more entitled. He'd interrupt me during conversations, mock my ideas, joke about me playing entrepreneur. When I questioned a strategy he was using at work, one I knew for a fact had failed in our beta markets, he laughed in my face. "You read an article about this online or something," he said. "Let me handle the real business stuff, babe." I let it slide. 4 months. I watched as he pitched my strategies at meetings. Watched as his name was added to patents he didn't create. Watched him accept awards, give speeches, soak in applause for ideas I'd quietly fed through intermediaries. It stopped being an experiment. It started becoming personal. I couldn't blame him entirely. The system had taught him to believe he deserved it. He walked through the world like it was built for him. Doors opened. People listened. No one questioned why the VP of strategy had no actual strategy, because he looked the part. White, charismatic, confident. And I was just a pretty face in the background. So I stayed there. Quiet. Still. Waiting. The turning point came on our 5th anniversary. He brought me to a lavish dinner party thrown by one of the firm's board members. It was the kind of room that buzzed with old money, oil tycoons, tech heirs, retired politicians. And as we stood near the bar, wine in hand, I heard him say it. "She tries," he said, laughing. "She really does. But business just isn't her thing." I keep telling her, maybe look into interior design or something more her vibe. He said it like a compliment. A backhanded pat on the head. The woman next to him laughed. "She's gorgeous though. At least she's a great accessory." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting every sacrifice I'd made for him. Every time I dimmed my light so he could shine brighter. Every board meeting I'd attended on mute. Every major contract I'd signed in silence. Every deal I let someone else announce just to protect a facade that no longer served me. That was the night I began phase 1. I brought Leah, my longtime executive assistant and closest confidant, into the fold. I had her quietly review Eric's company email, install audit-level surveillance on every office he touched, and flag any unethical activity. I instructed our legal team to begin building a case. Every questionable transaction, every internal message, every whisper of misconduct, I wanted it documented. I planted new leadership across departments. Hired from outside the old boys club. Gave second chances to brilliant women who had been pushed out by Eric's cronies. I rebuilt the core of Carter Dynamics from within, while the outside world kept cheering for the shiny men in suits. And then I decided to go deeper. I created Emily Walker. A failed graphic designer. A woman with a gap in her resume. A woman desperate to get her foot in the door. I wanted to know how deep the rot went. So I applied. When the confirmation came in, Eric made the mistake of reading it over my shoulder. "Really?" he said. "You think they're going to hire you?" I smiled. I've got nothing to lose. The day of the interview, he left early. Didn't even say goodbye. Too focused on his team's Q1 presentation. The one I had rewritten for them the night before. I arrived an hour early, as instructed. The receptionist looked me up and down and said, "Sit. HR will get you when they're ready." I watched as Eric and his friends swaggered into the building, coffee in hand, wearing smug smiles like armor. I watched him send the text after he saw me in the hallway. Watched their phones light up with laughter. Watched the exact moment the interview turned from evaluation to entertainment. They asked me what my biggest weakness was. I guess I care too much, I whispered. They laughed out loud. And I smiled inside. Because I already knew how it ended. That was the premise. That was the foundation. The humiliation wasn't the beginning. It was the fuel. This wasn't just about one man's ego. This was about a culture. A system that rewarded arrogance. That mocked vulnerability. That celebrated power in its most toxic form. And I was done playing nice. I was done being polite. I wasn't just going to take back what was mine. I was going to expose them all and build something better in their place. Because this time, I wouldn't do it in silence. I wouldn't do it in disguise. I'd do it as who I truly was. Natalie Carter. CEO. Founder. Architect. Enforcer. And they were going to learn that the real boss had been next door the whole time. Revenge was never the plan. But survival? That was non-negotiable. It started with quiet moments of doubt. Tiny flickers in Eric's behavior that I brushed off in the beginning. He started staying late more often, not late as in working late, but late as in showing up after midnight, reeking of expensive scotch and someone else's perfume. He claimed it was networking. Team building. Pressure from above. I didn't question him, not out loud. Instead, I hired a second private investigator. I already had one on retainer for financial surveillance. Now I needed someone who specialized in people. Within a week, I had footage. Eric, half-drunk, leaned across a bar booth, whispering confidential details about our upcoming merger to a former colleague from a rival firm. I watched him, pixel by pixel, sell pieces of my company for social currency. He wanted clout. Power. He thought giving tips made him look connected. Smart. In control. But what he didn't know was that every deal he leaked was fake. I had been feeding him strategic decoys for months, testing his loyalty, tracking where the information ended up. He failed every time. The footage was just one layer. The real betrayal came in the emails. Hundreds of them. Some innocent, calendar invites, budget requests, meeting notes. But others? They dripped with entitlement and disrespect. He made jokes about my job hunt to his team. Called me a domestic investment. Suggested I was milking the marriage while he carried the weight of the household. I read one message he sent to HR. Let's maybe not bring in too many women on this round. Things run smoother when there's less drama. Another, to the VP of Finance. She's trying again. Resubmitted a resume under a different name this time. It's sad, honestly. That one made me pause. Because he was right. I had submitted another resume. Emily Walker. The alias I created for the fake interview I'd walked into days earlier. I stared at the timestamp on that email. 10:37 a.m. The same moment I was sitting in a chair outside the HR office, pretending to check my phone while my hands shook from calculated nerves. He had recognized me. He knew it was me. And instead of confronting me, or even keeping the secret, he used it as content for his workplace comedy routine. I felt something snap inside me. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Clarity. I was done collecting evidence. Done giving him more rope. It was time to hang the curtain on the show. But before I could act, he made the first move. That weekend, he brought home divorce papers. I found them tucked inside his briefcase, half filled out. He hadn't signed yet. But the message was clear. He was preparing to walk away with half of everything. My company. My real estate. My brand. My legacy. And if I didn't play my cards right, he'd succeed. Because on paper, I was the broke wife. The non-contributor. The dependent. After all, he'd filed our taxes that way. I let him. It helped the facade. But now it threatened everything. I sat alone that night, in our overpriced kitchen with its imported marble countertops and the wine fridge he never used properly, staring at the document. It was already stained from the sweat of my palm. The man sleeping in our bed had no idea that I had signed his offer letter. He had no idea the private jet he bragged about on Instagram was registered to a holding company under my name. He had no idea the prenup he forced me to sign, the one he thought protected his assets, was legally irrelevant because every cent he brought into the marriage had come from bonuses I authorized. He was building his castle on my land. But now the eviction notice was coming. I called Leah. "We're going to war," I said. She didn't ask who with. She already knew. The next week, I stopped pretending. I didn't bother answering Eric's sarcastic questions about where I was going or what I was working on. I stopped cooking his favorite meals. Stopped laughing at his passive-aggressive jokes. He noticed. "You good?" he asked one night. "Just tired," I said, smiling. He bought it. Narcissists always think silence means submission. But behind the scenes, I was detonating landmines. We began freezing access. Quietly. Accounts under scrutiny. Internal servers logged. Security teams retrained. I didn't tell anyone why. I didn't need to. I had spent years preparing for the day the mask came off. And it was getting closer. Eric began to spiral. He could feel it. The walls shifting. The tone of meetings getting colder. The board getting harder to charm. He tried to hold his ground. Tried to assert dominance the only way he knew how, intimidation. He yelled at junior analysts. Fired a brilliant female product manager for attitude. Started showing up drunk to meetings. Each time, I let it happen. Each time, I smiled in silence. Because every action he took was more evidence. Every tantrum another nail. And then the audit report came in. Over $700,000 in undocumented reimbursements. Travel expenses labeled as client entertainment that corresponded to weekends in the Hamptons. 5-star dinners charged during weeks we had no events scheduled. He was stealing from me. From my company. And spending it like he earned it. We brought it to legal. Quietly. Carefully. We wanted it clean. No scandals. No lawsuits. No counterattacks. We wanted truth. And we had it. By now, Eric was paranoid. He accused his team of backstabbing. Started holding private meetings. Locked his office door during work hours. He wasn't wrong. His team was working behind his back. With me. Every person he trusted had already flipped. Loyalty, it turns out, has a shelf life, especially when the leader is drunk on power and drowning in delusion. I gave my board a preview. Laid out everything: the financial misconduct, the HR violations, the leaked strategies, the sexist policies, the retaliation. They stared at me in silence when I finished. One finally asked, "Why now?" And I told them. Because for the last 8 years, I've been watching my company become the very thing I built it to fight. And I'm done being polite about it. They nodded. Unanimous support. Termination approved. No settlement. No severance. No spin. Just justice. The night before the reveal, I stood at the window of my penthouse, the one Eric believed he paid for, and watched him stumble out of an Uber with his friends. They were drunk. Loud. Laughing. "Tomorrow's gonna be a SH asterisk though," one of them said, tossing his tie over his shoulder. Another pointless all-hands meeting. Eric grunted. "She's probably still trying to get hired downstairs." They laughed. I smiled. Because he was right about one thing. Tomorrow was going to be a shit show. Just not the kind he expected. The building felt different that morning. Sharper. Quieter. Like the calm just before a storm that no one realizes is coming, except the one holding the lightning. I arrived at 6 a.m., not through the private elevator I usually used, but the front entrance, through security, past reception, right where every camera could see me. I wanted them to. The receptionist gave me a double take. "Ms. Carter?" I smiled. "CEO Carter," I corrected gently. The surprise in her eyes said it all. She wasn't the only one about to be shocked. Upstairs, the boardroom was already prepared. My team had been working all night, screens aligned, documentation queued, legal counsel on standby in the adjacent suite. Every document was time-stamped, notarized, and cross-referenced. We weren't just revealing a betrayal. We were delivering a reckoning. At 8:47 a.m., I got the text. "He's on his way up." Perfect. I stepped out of the boardroom and down the hallway, toward the executive conference room Eric loved to use for his leadership team huddles. Inside, I could already hear laughter. Arrogant, lazy laughter. The sound of power unchecked for too long. And then she just froze, Eric was saying. Like, full deer in headlights. I almost felt bad. Almost. Michael laughed. "You sure she wasn't just casing the building? Maybe she's planning to sue." "You kidding? She probably thinks she still has a chance," Eric snorted. "Girls should have stuck to Pinterest boards and yoga. Not the big leagues." That was enough. I pushed open the door. They didn't hear it at first. But they felt it. The air shifted. Energy snapped. Eric turned mid-sentence and froze. His smirk collapsed. His glass slipped just slightly in his hand. "Natalie," he said, his voice already trembling. I stepped in, letting the heels click across the floor like a countdown. Each man fell silent. Eyes tracked me as if watching a ghost materialize. "No," I said calmly, "not Natalie." I held up the security badge. "CEO Carter." The silence was deafening. Eric blinked twice, like his brain couldn't reconcile the image in front of him. "You're what?" "I'm your boss," I said. "Correction, I was your boss. Until this morning." Michael shifted in his chair. "Is this a prank?" I smiled. "No, Michael. But you're welcome to laugh in HR's exit interview. They're expecting you in 20. Eric's face had gone full chalk. He opened his mouth, but I beat him to it. "You know that woman you mocked last week in the interview? That was me. The candidate with the bad suit and the desperate eyes? Emily Walker?" That was the final test. You failed. I pulled out my phone and tapped a button. Every screen in the room lit up, security footage, audio clips, spreadsheets, email threads. Years of data, all leading to one truth. They weren't just bad managers. They were frauds, bullies, liabilities. I stepped toward the center of the table and placed a single folder in front of Eric. Here's your termination letter. No severance. No benefits. All assets under legal review. Security will escort you out. His hand shook as he reached for it. You can't, he started. I can, I said. I'm your husband. Not anymore. I took off my wedding ring and placed it beside the folder. Michael shot up from his seat, chair screeching. Jesus, he whispered. Is this real? Sit down, I said. Not loud. Just final. He sat. I nodded to the two security officers waiting by the door. Please begin processing the removals. One by one, they stood and walked out, silent, stunned, humiliated. Eric was the last. He lingered. Natalie, please. We can talk about this. I met his eyes. Cold. Steady. There's nothing left to talk about, Eric. You talked enough, at dinner parties, at happy hours, in that boardroom. You made jokes about my intelligence, my worth, my existence. You forgot who built this place. Who gave you a seat at the table? He looked like he wanted to argue. But he knew. It was over. I turned my back on him as he was led out. And I walked back into the boardroom. The entire board stood when I entered. No one sat until I did. Shall we begin? I asked. And we did. In 1 hour, we passed 23 resolutions, governance restructuring, culture overhaul, leadership audits, and a full-scale internal review. When it was over, I stood again. I have one final request, I said. I want every woman who was dismissed, undermined, or driven out by that former team to be contacted today. Their applications reopened. Their stories heard. The vote was unanimous. As I walked out of the room, Leah was waiting with a champagne bottle and a knowing look. You did it, she said. I took the bottle, popped the cork, and smiled. No, I said. We started. Because revenge wasn't the ending. It was the ignition. The real fire was only just beginning. I didn't cry when I fired him. I didn't flinch when I handed Eric the folder. Didn't blink when I saw the betrayal in his eyes, because that moment wasn't about pain. It wasn't even about revenge. It was about clarity. About finally stepping out of the shadows I had once willingly walked into and reclaiming every inch of power I had given away. And now, standing at the top floor of Carter Dynamics, looking down at a city buzzing with ambition and broken dreams, I felt something I hadn't in years. Stillness. Not the hollow silence of being ignored. Not the quiet of being underestimated. But real stillness. The kind that comes when the storm is over and all that's left is rebuilding. That afternoon, the company felt different. Employees passed me in the hallway with wide eyes, half awe, half confusion. They whispered my name like it was legend. As if I were a ghost they'd only ever heard stories about, now walking in flesh and heels across the executive floor. Natalie Carter. Founder. CEO. The woman behind the curtain had stepped into the spotlight. And she wasn't going anywhere. I held an all-hands meeting that same week. No stage. No mic. No theatrics. Just me, standing at the center of the atrium in a black suit, speaking to over 900 employees, some in chairs, some standing, some tuning in via live stream from across the globe. I know most of you don't know me, I said. But you've all worked for me. You just didn't know it. Gasps. Whispers. Then silence. I built this company 12 years ago out of grief, rage, and hope. I've watched it grow from a rented co-working space to a global force. And somewhere along the way, I let it get hijacked. I paused. I take responsibility for that. I handed the keys to people I thought could lead, and I watched them fail you. But that ends now. Applause started slow. Then louder. Then standing. I let it roll for exactly 10 seconds before holding up my hand. I'm not here for applause, I said. I'm here to work. With you. Not above you. Starting now, every department gets direct access to executive leadership. No more gatekeeping. No more boys' clubs. No more you're not a culture fit. There was no applause this time. Just nods. Some eyes glazed with tears. A few people even whispered thank you. I meant what I said. The next 30 days were the hardest I'd worked in years. I met with team leads one-on-one. I read every complaint that had been buried. I made amends with people who deserved better and opened doors for the ones who'd been denied access. We rehired 4 women who had been wrongfully pushed out. We promoted 2 interns who'd been told to smile more instead of listen to. We tripled our investment into mental health resources. We launched a leadership mentorship program for everyone. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it. And as for Eric, he went quiet. For a while. I got updates, of course. He moved in with his mother. Tried to spin his firing as a strategic disagreement. Posted vague quotes on LinkedIn about betrayal and resilience. Tried to reach out through mutual friends. Even sent me a letter. I never read it. What was there left to say? I didn't hate him. I didn't wish him pain. But I couldn't let him rewrite the ending. So I wrote it myself. We finalized the divorce with the efficiency of a business transaction. No back and forth. No drama. He walked away with nothing but the car he'd been leasing and a Rolex I'd bought him 3 Christmases ago. The house? Mine. The stocks? Locked. The legacy? Untouched. He called me a monster in the tabloids. Claimed I was calculating, cold, manipulative. And maybe I was. But only because I had to be. The world doesn't hand power to women like me. You have to build it. Protect it. Bleed for it. And when they come to take it from you, smiling, laughing, calling you babe, you better be ready to burn down everything they think they control. That's what I did. And I didn't do it for vengeance. I did it for her. The girl I used to be. The one who sat in rooms full of suits pretending not to understand what was going on. The one who smiled through being interrupted. The one who was told she was too emotional for leadership. The one who lowered her voice to be less intimidating. The one who once believed love meant shrinking herself so someone else could shine. I did it for her. And I did it for every woman who had to watch someone else get credit for her ideas, someone else get promoted over her, someone else get invited into the room she helped build. We deserve better. We're not just brilliant. We're not just capable. We are dangerous in the best possible way. And we are done being polite. 6 months later, Carter Dynamics was unrecognizable, in the best way. Our stock hit a new high. Retention improved. Innovation surged. We had projects in the pipeline that made our competitors nervous. We made space for brilliance to grow, not just from people who fit the mold, but from those who never had a chance to mold anything before. And me? I finally took my nameplate out of the drawer. Hung it on my door. Natalie Carter, CEO. The first time an intern knocked on that door to pitch an idea, he looked nervous. "You don't have to sell me," I told him. "Just speak like someone who deserves to be heard." Because he did. Because we all do. The real emotional payoff wasn't Eric's downfall. It was watching a room of 26-year-olds redesign a product Eric once said would never scale. It was getting an email from a junior UX designer saying, "This is the first time I've felt safe in my career." It was standing in an elevator with someone who didn't recognize me and hearing them say, "Something's changed here, and I think it's finally for the better." That's what mattered. That's what made it all worth it. Because success isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's quiet. Sometimes, it walks into a fake interview just to prove a point. Sometimes, it fires 5 men in tailored suits without ever raising its voice. And sometimes, it's the woman you laughed at who ends up writing your severance check. So laugh. Please. Because we remember every joke. Every whisper. Every eye roll. And when we come back, it's not to get even. It's to build something you could never imagine. And this time, we're not asking permission. They always tell you to be the bigger person. To forgive. To rise above. To walk away with grace and let karma handle it. But sometimes, karma needs help. Sometimes, Justice wears heels, speaks softly, and walks into a boardroom with a file folder and a quiet smile. Sometimes, being the bigger person means being the one who stops the cycle. Who refuses to let arrogance win? Who won't let another woman sit in silence while a man explains her own idea back to her? Who won't tolerate another joke at someone's expense, because those jokes are never just jokes. They're weapons. And for too long, we've let them cut us down. I used to think my power was in the empire I built. The contracts I signed. The shares I owned. The rooms I could walk into without a title and still command silence. But now I know my real power is something deeper. It's in restraint, the years I waited, watching, learning, choosing not to burn it all down just because I could. It's in strategy, knowing when to move, when to speak, when to disappear, and when to rise. It's in self-respect, the kind that doesn't need applause, or revenge, or public validation. Because here's the truth. I didn't fire Eric to humiliate him. I fired him to protect the people he was hurting. I didn't destroy his career to prove a point. I did it to stop the bleeding. Because power in the wrong hands is violence, even when it's dressed in a tailored suit and cologne. And silence in the right hands can become thunder if you wait long enough. So what's the moral of this story? It's not just don't underestimate a woman. You've heard that one before. It's not the CEO might be your wife, though sure, that's a good one. It's bigger. More urgent. More universal. It's this. When you build something, anything, with love, with vision, with sweat and tears and everything you've got, don't ever hand it over to someone who doesn't respect how hard you fought to make it real. Don't give your voice to someone who only wants to speak over it. Don't shrink so someone else can feel tall. Don't set yourself on fire to keep another person warm, and then apologize when the flames catch. Because here's the thing, when you stop apologizing for your ambition, your strength, your silence, your brilliance, they panic. They scramble. They call you cold. Arrogant. A B***TCH. Let them. Because you know the truth. You're not difficult. You're not too much. You're complete. You are the storm and the shelter. The architect and the wrecking ball. The fire and the rebuild. So stop asking for a seat at the table. Buy the damn building. I know now that the Real win was never Eric's fall, it was my rise. Not just back into the light, but into my full self. Unhidden. Unapologetic. Undeniable. And that, to me, is the real lesson. Revenge might feel sweet. But transformation? That's holy. We don't fight for revenge. We fight so the next woman doesn't have to. We fight so our daughters grow up in rooms where they don't have to prove they belong. Where their silence doesn't make them invisible. Where their voice doesn't make them threatening. Where their brilliance isn't rebranded as luck, or worse, help from a man. That's the future I'm building now. And every time I see a woman walk into a meeting with her head held high, speak without hedging, pitch without apologizing, take up space without shrinking, I smile. Because I know we're doing it. We're shifting the room. And for the ones still waiting, still quiet, still pretending to be less than they are, I see you. Your moment is coming. And when it does, don't whisper. Don't ask. Roar.
That's it for today's story on Life Reflections. I'd love to hear your take. Drop a comment below with your thoughts or a story of your own. If you enjoyed this, give a like and subscribe to keep the reflections coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.